Lieutenant Sarah Chen pressed herself against the cold metal wall of the abandoned mining station, her breathing barely audible through the advanced filters of her stealth suit. The darkness was her oldest friend, wrapping around her like a protective blanket as she watched the alien patrol move past her position. 3 Catherian warriors, each standing nearly 8 feet tall with their distinctive crystalline armor that reflected the dim emergency lighting, walked with the confidence of predators who believed they owned this sector of space. Sarah had been hiding in the shadows for most of her life. As a child on the outer colonies, she had learned to disappear when the raiders came. When her parents died in one of those attacks, she had survived by becoming invisible, living in the spaces between walls, in the forgotten corners where light never reached. The military had found her eventually, a ghost of a girl who could move through enemy territory without being detected. Now, at 26, she was something the galaxy had never seen before. While other species relied on technology, numbers, or brute force, humans had discovered something unique about Sarah and others like her. They could become one with darkness itself, moving through shadows as if they were doorways to another dimension. The scientists called it quantum shadow manipulation, but Sarah simply knew it as coming home. The Catherians had been expanding their empire for 3 centuries, consuming worlds and enslaving entire species. Their technology was superior to most civilizations. Their warriors were bred for combat, and their ships could tear through space-time itself. They had never encountered significant resistance until they met humanity 6 months ago. The first human colonies they attacked had fallen quickly, just as they expected. But then reports began filtering back to their command centers about impossible losses. Entire squads of Catherian soldiers would simply vanish from secured positions. Supply convoys would arrive at their destinations completely empty, their crews found unconscious with no memory of what had happened. Most disturbing of all were the stories of shadows that moved independently of any light source, shadows that seemed to watch and wait. Sarah's comm device vibrated softly against her wrist. 3 short pulses followed by 2 long ones, the signal she had been waiting for. Her target was in position 3 levels below, in what used to be the station's command center. General HFY, the architect of the Catherian expansion into human space, had made a fatal mistake by choosing this location for his forward command post. He believed the abandoned human facility would provide perfect cover for his operations. He was wrong. Moving through the shadows required more than just skill or training. It demanded a complete understanding of darkness itself, an ability to read the spaces between light and find the paths that existed in quantum uncertainty. Sarah had discovered her gift during her first military mission, when her squad had been pinned down by enemy fire. In her desperation to reach wounded comrades, she had somehow stepped sideways into shadow and emerged 30 meters away, behind enemy lines. The military's best scientists still couldn't fully explain how she did it. They knew it involved manipulating probability fields at the quantum level, somehow using the natural uncertainty of particle positions to create temporary corridors through space. Other humans could learn rudimentary shadow movement, but Sarah and perhaps a dozen others could truly disappear into darkness and emerge anywhere shadows existed. As she prepared to move deeper into the station, Sarah thought about the call sign that had spread through Catherian communication networks like a virus. They called her Umbra, the shadow that brought death. Intelligence reports indicated that some Catherian units had begun refusing missions in sectors where she might be operating. Their proud warrior culture was learning what fear meant. The irony wasn't lost on her. She who had spent her childhood hiding from violence had become the thing that others hid from. But there was a difference. Sarah fought to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Every Catherian soldier she removed from the battlefield meant human civilians who would live to see another day. Sarah checked her equipment one final time. Her suit's stealth generators were fully charged, her quantum blade was properly calibrated, and her emergency beacon was set to the correct frequency. If something went wrong, her backup team would know where to find her body. But Sarah didn't plan on dying today. She had work to do. The shadows around her seemed to pulse with anticipation as she prepared to descend into the station's depths. General HFY was about to discover what every other Catherian commander had learned too late. In the darkness between stars, humanity had found its greatest weapon. Not technology or numbers or even courage, but the simple truth that some humans could become darkness itself. Sarah smiled grimly as she stepped sideways into shadow, her form dissolving into quantum uncertainty. The hunt was about to begin, and she was very good at hunting. The Catherians had brought war to humanity's doorstep, but they were about to learn that humans fought differently than any species they had ever encountered. In the depths of space, where light struggled to penetrate the endless void, Sarah Chen moved like death itself, carrying the hopes of her species and the fear of her enemies. She lived in shadows, but her call sign commanded dread across the galaxy. Sarah emerged from the quantum shadow 3 levels down, materializing behind a support pillar in the station's main corridor. The transition always left her slightly disoriented, as if part of her consciousness needed a moment to catch up with her physical form. She pressed her back against the cold metal and listened carefully to the sounds around her. The Catherian command center buzzed with activity. Through the partially open blast doors, she could see at least 20 alien soldiers working at various stations, their crystalline armor catching and reflecting the blue-white light from their displays. General Vexhai stood at the center of it all, his imposing figure unmistakable even from a distance. Unlike his subordinates, his armor was deep purple, marking him as nobility within their rigid caste system. Sarah had studied everything humanity knew about Vexhai during her 3-day journey to this station. He was responsible for the destruction of 6 human colonies, the enslavement of nearly 2 million civilians, and the development of new terror tactics specifically designed to break human morale. Intelligence suggested he was planning something even worse, a final assault that would cripple humanity's ability to resist Catherian expansion. The general was giving orders to his staff, his voice carrying that distinctive harmonic quality that all Catherians possessed. Their language sounded like crystal chimes mixed with subsonic growls, beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Sarah's translator implant fed her a real-time interpretation of his words, and what she heard made her blood run cold. The human breeding facilities on Kepler 442b are ready for the next phase, Vexhai was saying. We will begin enhanced genetic modification procedures within the week. These humans will make excellent servants once we remove their troublesome independence and aggressive tendencies. Sarah's hand tightened on her quantum blade. The Catherians weren't just conquering human worlds. They were planning to remake humanity itself, turning her species into docile slaves through genetic manipulation. The thought of human children being altered to serve their alien masters filled her with a rage that threatened to overwhelm her careful training. But rage could wait. Right now, she needed to be smart. The command center had multiple entry points, but all were heavily guarded. Motion sensors covered every obvious approach, and the Catherians had learned enough about human stealth technology to deploy countermeasures. What they didn't understand was that Sarah's abilities went far beyond anything their sensors could detect. She studied the lighting patterns in the room, mapping the shadows and calculating her approach. The Catherians preferred bright, even illumination, but their own equipment created small pockets of darkness that she could use. There, behind the main tactical display, a cluster of server towers created a shadow large enough for her to use as an entry point. Sarah closed her eyes and felt for the quantum pathways that connected all shadows. It was like reaching into cold water, feeling for currents that existed in probability rather than space. The sensation was both familiar and alien, as if she was touching a part of reality that wasn't meant for living beings to experience. She found the path she needed and stepped into it. The journey through quantum shadow was unlike normal movement. Sarah existed in a state between presence and absence, aware of the physical world but not quite part of it. She could see the command center as a maze of light and darkness, with her target clearly visible at the center. The passage took only seconds in real time, but to Sarah it felt like floating through an ocean of black glass. She emerged behind the server towers, immediately dropping into a crouch and scanning for threats. None of the Catherians had noticed her arrival. Their attention focused on their general's briefing. Sarah activated her suit's recording systems and began documenting everything she could see on their displays. Either intelligence she gathered in the next few minutes would be invaluable to human strategic command. Catherian troop movements, supply line information, and most importantly, the location of their breeding facilities. Sarah memorized everything, her enhanced training allowing her to process and store vast amounts of tactical data. But as she watched and recorded, General Vexhai said something that made her freeze in place. The shadow creature that has been terrorizing our forces will not be a problem much longer, he announced to his staff. Our scientists have developed a new type of illumination field that disrupts quantum coherence. When we deploy it, the human called Umbra will discover that darkness can no longer hide her. Sarah felt her blood turn to ice. If the Catherians had found a way to neutralize her abilities, it would change everything. She was humanity's most effective weapon against their expansion, responsible for more enemy casualties than entire battle fleets. Without her quantum shadow manipulation, she would be just another soldier facing impossible odds. She needed to get this information back to Human Command immediately, but as she prepared to retreat into shadow, an alarm began blaring throughout the station. Red lights flashed and Catherian soldiers began moving with urgent purpose. Perimeter breach detected, a voice announced in their crystal chime language. Unknown contact in Section 7. Sarah's heart raced. Had they detected her somehow? But as she listened to the reports flowing into the command center, she realized the truth was worse than discovery. A human assault team had arrived at the station, probably sent as backup without knowing she was already here. They were walking into a trap that would not only get them killed but would also compromise her mission. General Vexhai smiled, an expression that looked wrong on his alien features. How convenient. We will have test subjects for our new illumination weapons. All units capture the humans alive if possible. Our scientists are eager to begin their experiments. Sarah faced an impossible choice. She could complete her original mission, eliminating Vexhai and escaping with the intelligence she had gathered. Or she could try to save the human assault team, knowing that doing so would likely get them all killed and waste everything she had learned. But as she watched Catherian soldiers preparing weapons designed to capture rather than kill, Sarah realized there was no choice at all. She had spent her childhood watching others die while she hid in shadows. She wouldn't do it again. The Queen of Darkness was about to step into the light. Sarah's quantum blade hummed to life in her hand as she made her decision. The weapon existed in multiple probability states simultaneously, able to cut through almost any material by disrupting molecular bonds at the quantum level. She had 3 minutes, maybe 4, before the Catherian forces reached the human assault team's position. She activated her comm system and sent a burst transmission on the emergency frequency. Umbra to Strike Team Alpha. Abort insertion immediately. Station is heavily fortified. Repeat, abort and withdraw. The response came back almost instantly. Negative, Umbra. We have wounded civilians aboard this station. Extraction is not optional. Sarah's blood went cold. Civilians changed everything. The abandoned mining station wasn't as empty as intelligence had believed. The Catherians were using it to hold human prisoners, probably workers they had captured from nearby colonies. Strike Team Alpha wasn't just conducting a military operation. They were attempting a rescue. Through the command center's tactical displays, Sarah could see the situation developing. 6 human soldiers were moving through the station's upper levels, trying to reach what appeared to be a holding area. They were skilled and well-equipped, but they had no idea they were walking into an ambush designed specifically to capture them alive. General Vexhai was coordinating the response personally, his purple armor gleaming under the command center's harsh lights. Deploy containment fields at these coordinates, he ordered, pointing to locations that would trap the humans in a dead-end corridor. Remember, we need them functional for the experiments. Sarah studied the tactical situation with the cold precision her training had instilled in her. The human team was outnumbered 5-1, facing enemies with superior technology and perfect knowledge of their position. Under normal circumstances, it would be a massacre. But circumstances were far from normal. She began moving through the command center, using the shadows cast by equipment and personnel to remain undetected. The Catherians had grown so focused on their ambush that they had forgotten the greatest threat was already among them. Sarah's first target was the communications operator, a young Catherian whose crystalline armor still showed the bright colors of an inexperienced warrior. She materialized from shadow directly behind him, her quantum blade sliding between the plates of his armor with surgical precision. He collapsed without a sound, his consciousness disrupted by the weapon's quantum field. The second target fell just as silently, then the third. Sarah moved like death itself, appearing and disappearing among the shadows that the Catherians couldn't see. Their attention remained fixed on their displays, watching the human team advance into their trap. But General Vexhai was more observant than his subordinates. As the fourth Catherian fell, the general's head snapped around, his enhanced senses detecting something wrong. His eyes, adapted for the low-light conditions of his homeworld, began scanning the darker areas of the command center. "Perimeter alert," he barked suddenly. "We have an infiltrator in the command center. Activate full illumination protocols immediately." The room exploded with light as emergency lighting systems engaged. Every shadow vanished in the brilliant white glare, leaving Sarah exposed near the main tactical console. 20 Catherian warriors turned toward her, their weapons already charging. But Sarah had anticipated this moment. During her reconnaissance, she had noticed something the Catherians had missed. The command center's primary power coupling ran directly through the floor beneath the main display, and she had placed a small quantum charge there while hidden in shadow. "Hello, General," she said calmly, her finger hovering over the detonator. "I believe you wanted to meet the infamous Umbra." Vexhi's expression shifted from surprise to cold calculation. "The shadow creature reveals herself at last. How disappointing. I expected something more impressive than a single human female." "Appearances can be deceiving," Sarah replied. Around her, Catherian soldiers maintained their positions, weapons trained on her but not yet firing. They wanted her alive for their experiments. "Speaking of deception, you might want to reconsider your ambush plans." She triggered the quantum charge. The explosion was carefully calibrated, designed to disrupt the station's power grid without causing catastrophic damage. The lights flickered and died, emergency power systems struggling to compensate. In the sudden darkness, Sarah disappeared like smoke, but she didn't retreat. Instead, she used the confusion to reach the station's communication array. Her fingers flew over the alien controls as she sent an encrypted message to Strike Team Alpha, providing them with detailed intelligence about Catherian positions and the location of the civilian prisoners. "All teams, this is Umbra," she broadcast. "Civilians are held in Section 12, Level 4. Enemy forces are deploying capture weapons. Do not allow yourselves to be taken alive. Whatever they're planning, it's worse than death." General Vexhi's voice boomed through the darkness. "Find her. Use thermal imaging, quantum sensors, anything. The shadow creature must not escape." But thermal imaging was useless against someone who could exist partially outside normal space. And quantum sensors couldn't lock onto a target that was manipulating quantum uncertainty itself. Sarah moved through the command center like a ghost, systematically destroying critical systems and eliminating key personnel. The tide of battle was turning. With their communications disrupted and their command structure collapsing, the Catherian forces found themselves fighting blind against enemies they couldn't see. Strike Team Alpha was making better progress than expected, using the intelligence Sarah had provided to avoid the worst of the ambush. But Sarah knew the situation was still desperate. Even with her help, 6 human soldiers couldn't fight their way through an entire Catherian garrison. They needed an edge, something that would allow them to complete their mission and escape alive. She found that edge in the station's reactor control room. The mining station's fusion reactor was old but powerful, designed to provide energy for massive excavation operations. If she could overload it in a controlled manner, the resulting electromagnetic pulse would disable most Catherian equipment while leaving human gear largely unaffected. The different technological bases meant their systems would respond differently to the pulse. But triggering such an overload would require someone to remain at the controls, manually regulating the reaction to prevent a complete meltdown. It was a suicide mission, and Sarah knew it. As she reached for the reactor controls, her comm system crackled to life. "Umbra, this is Strike Team Alpha. We've secured the civilians, but we're pinned down 2 levels above you. Can you provide support?" Sarah's hand hovered over the overload controls. She could save the strike team and the civilians, but only at the cost of her own life. The woman who had lived in shadows was about to step into the light one final time. Sarah stared at the reactor controls, her mind racing through calculations and possibilities. The electromagnetic pulse would need precise timing to be effective without killing everyone on the station. But as she prepared to sacrifice herself, an idea began forming in her mind, born from years of pushing her quantum abilities to their absolute limits. What if she didn't have to die here? The quantum shadow manipulation that allowed her to move through darkness worked by temporarily shifting her molecular structure into probability states. She existed in multiple quantum positions simultaneously, choosing which one to manifest in normal space. But what if she could apply that same principle to the reactor itself? It was theoretically possible to create a quantum cascade in the fusion reaction, causing it to exist in multiple states until she chose which outcome to manifest. She could have both an electromagnetic pulse and a stable reactor, then simply choose the timeline where she survived. The risk was enormous. If she miscalculated, she could tear a hole in space-time itself. But as Catherian forces closed in on Strike Team Alpha's position, Sarah realized she had no choice but to attempt something that had never been tried before. She placed her hands on the reactor controls and reached out with her quantum senses, feeling for the delicate probability fields that governed the fusion reaction. The energy flowing through the core was vast and chaotic, but Sarah had learned to navigate chaos. She began manipulating the quantum uncertainty at the heart of the reaction, creating branching possibilities for how the overload would unfold. Meanwhile, General Vex-High had rallied his forces and was leading a direct assault on the human positions. The Catherian commander had abandoned his capture orders in favor of overwhelming force. His crystalline armor deflected human weapons fire as he advanced up the station's main corridor, flanked by 24 elite warriors. "The humans will pay for their interference," he snarled into his comm system, "and when we capture their shadow creature, she will learn what true pain means." But Strike Team Alpha wasn't retreating. Led by Captain Marcus Rivera, a veteran of 3 colonial wars, the humans had established a defensive position that maximized their advantages. They used the station's narrow corridors to limit Catherian numbers, and their superior tactics to outmaneuver enemies who relied too heavily on technological superiority. Plasma charges on the left flank. Rivera shouted to his team, "Thompson, get those civilians to the extraction point. Martinez, I need covering fire on that purple bastard." The battle raged through the station's corridors as Sarah worked frantically with the reactor. She could feel the quantum possibilities multiplying around her, creating a web of potential outcomes that stretched across probability space. In some timelines, the reactor exploded and killed everyone aboard. In others, it failed to generate the necessary pulse. But there, among the chaos of possibilities, she found the path she needed. The quantum cascade began building in the fusion core, reality itself beginning to fracture along probability lines. Sarah felt herself existing in multiple states simultaneously. Her consciousness scattered across dozens of potential timelines. In one, she was already dead from radiation exposure. In another, she had never entered the reactor room at all. But in the timeline she was fighting to manifest, she stood at the controls of a perfectly stable reactor that had just generated the exact electromagnetic pulse needed to save her allies. The pulse erupted from the station's core like a wave of invisible lightning. Catherian weapon systems failed instantly, their crystalline technology unable to cope with the quantum interference. Emergency lighting died throughout the facility, leaving both sides fighting in near-total darkness. But darkness was humanity's element now. Sarah emerged from the reactor room to find the station transformed. Catherian soldiers stumbled blindly through corridors they could no longer navigate, their advanced sensors dead, and their night vision overwhelmed by residual quantum static. Strike Team Alpha, equipped with more primitive but robust technology, found themselves with a decisive advantage for the first time in the battle. "All teams, this is Umbra," Sarah broadcast on the emergency frequency. "Enemy technology is down for approximately 15 minutes. Execute Extraction Protocol 7 immediately." The response was swift and professional. Human soldiers moved through the darkened station like wolves hunting prey, using their natural adaptability and superior training to devastating effect. They had learned to fight without relying on technology, while the Catherians had never imagined they might need such skills. Sarah found General Vex-High trapped in a collapsed section of corridor, his purple armor cracked and sparking from the electromagnetic pulse. The mighty Catherian warrior who had terrorized human colonies was now helpless in the dark, his enhanced senses useless without technological support. "Impossible," he whispered as Sarah materialized from shadow beside him. "The quantum cascade should have killed you. No organic being can survive that level of probability manipulation." "You're right," Sarah admitted, kneeling beside the injured general. "No organic being should be able to survive what I just did. But humans have a habit of doing impossible things when the people we care about are in danger." She placed her quantum blade against his throat, the weapon's probability field causing his crystalline armor to shimmer and crack. "Now, let's discuss those breeding facilities you mentioned." Vex-High's eyes widened in terror. The proud warrior who had ordered the enslavement of millions was finally experiencing the fear his victims had felt. "You cannot threaten me!" I am Cytherian nobility. I have rights under the— You have no rights, Sarah interrupted coldly. You gave up any claim to civilized treatment when you decided to experiment on human children. So I'll ask again, where are the breeding facilities? The general's resistance crumbled in the face of her absolute certainty. He provided coordinates for 7 facilities throughout Cytherian space, along with security codes and defensive information. Sarah recorded everything, knowing this intelligence could save millions of lives. As she prepared to leave, Vexhai made one final attempt at defiance. You may have won today, shadow creature, but this changes nothing. The Cytherian Empire spans 1,000 worlds. We will adapt to your quantum abilities, and when we do, your species will serve us as they were always meant to. Sarah paused at the edge of the corridor, her form already beginning to dissolve into shadow. You still don't understand, do you? This was never about my abilities. This was about what humans become when you threaten the people we protect. She vanished into quantum darkness, leaving the general alone with his failure. Throughout the station, Strike Team Alpha was completing their extraction. The rescued civilians, weak from captivity but alive, were being carried to the evacuation shuttles. Captain Rivera's team had suffered casualties, but they had achieved their primary objective. As the last shuttle prepared to depart, Rivera received an encrypted message from Umbra. The intelligence package contained enough information to cripple Cytherian operations throughout this sector of space. But more importantly, it proved that even their most advanced commanders could be defeated by human determination and ingenuity. The Shadow War was far from over, but today humanity had struck a blow that would echo across the galaxy. 3 weeks after the mining station operation, Sarah sat in the briefing room aboard the human command vessel Defiance, staring at holographic displays that showed the devastating effectiveness of the intelligence she had gathered. 7 Cytherian breeding facilities had been destroyed in coordinated strikes. Thousands of human prisoners had been liberated. The enemy's expansion into the Tau Ceti system had been completely halted, but the victory came with a price. Sarah's manipulation of the reactor's quantum cascade had pushed her abilities beyond their natural limits. Medical scans showed cellular damage at the quantum level, microscopic tears in the fabric of her DNA where probability and reality had fractured. The doctors couldn't predict how long she had before the damage became irreversible. Admiral Chen Martinez, no relation despite the shared surname, leaned forward across the conference table. The Cytherians are adapting faster than we anticipated. Our intelligence indicates they're developing new countermeasures specifically designed to neutralize quantum shadow manipulation. Sarah nodded grimly. She had expected this development. The Cytherians were a technologically advanced species with centuries of military experience. It was inevitable that they would find ways to defend against humanity's newest weapon. What kind of countermeasures? She asked. Quantum entanglement fields, replied Dr. Elizabeth Hawking, the team's chief scientist. They create a stable probability matrix that prevents quantum uncertainty manipulation. Our preliminary tests suggest they could completely neutralize your abilities within a localized area. The implications were sobering. If the Cytherians could deploy these fields on a wide scale, Sarah and the handful of other humans with quantum abilities would become ordinary soldiers facing impossible odds. The psychological advantage that the name Umbra carried would evaporate, and with it humanity's best hope for survival. There's something else, Admiral Martinez continued, his expression grave. We've been monitoring Cytherian communications since your last mission. They're planning something called Operation Void Light. We don't know the details, but they're mobilizing their entire Third Fleet for it. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. The Cytherian Third Fleet was their most elite force, commanded by High General Zix Thara, a veteran of a dozen conquered species. If they were deploying such resources for a single operation, it could only mean one thing. They were planning to end the war decisively. Do we have any idea what their target might be? Sarah asked. Earth, Martinez replied simply. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. Earth, humanity's birth world, the symbolic heart of their civilization. Even though most humans now lived on colony worlds scattered across the galaxy, Earth remained the spiritual center of their species. Its destruction would shatter human morale and probably end organized resistance to Cytherian expansion. When? Sarah asked. 6 weeks, maybe 8. They're gathering forces from across their empire, which takes time. But once they're ready, nothing we have can stop them. The home fleet is powerful, but not against those numbers. Sarah stood and walked to the viewport, looking out at the stars scattered like diamonds across the darkness. Somewhere among those distant suns, an alien empire was preparing to destroy everything humanity had built. The weight of her species' survival seemed to press down on her shoulders like a physical force. There might be another way, Dr. Hawking said quietly. It's theoretical and incredibly dangerous, but it could give us the edge we need. Sarah turned back to the table. I'm listening. We've been studying your quantum abilities, trying to understand how they work at the fundamental level. We think we know why you can manipulate probability fields while others can't. Your brain structure has unique quantum coherence patterns, probably the result of genetic mutations caused by radiation exposure during your childhood on the outer colonies. Sarah nodded. She had heard this theory before. The same radiation that had killed her parents might have given her the abilities that now made her humanity's greatest weapon. We believe we can artificially replicate those patterns in other humans. Hawking continued. The process would be extremely risky, with a high probability of death or permanent brain damage. But if it worked, we could create an entire unit of quantum shadow operatives. The idea was both thrilling and terrifying. An army of soldiers who could move through darkness like ghosts, appearing anywhere shadows existed, would be nearly unstoppable. But the cost in human lives during the experimental process would be enormous. How many volunteers would you need? Admiral Martinez asked. For a meaningful military impact, at least 50 successful conversions. Given the mortality rate we're projecting, we'd need to start with several hundred volunteers. Sarah closed her eyes, imagining hundreds of young soldiers willingly submitting to an experimental procedure that would likely kill them, all for the chance to gain abilities like hers. The thought made her sick. There's another option, she said slowly. Instead of trying to create more people like me, what if we enhanced my existing abilities? Dr. Hawking frowned. Sarah, your cellular damage is already severe. Any further enhancement could kill you outright. But if it worked, could I do more than just manipulate shadows? Could I affect quantum fields on a larger scale? Theoretically, yes. If we could stabilize your quantum coherence patterns while amplifying their range, you might be able to manipulate probability on a massive scale. Ships, entire fleets even. But the energy requirements would be enormous, and your body simply isn't designed to channel that kind of power. Sarah looked around the table at the faces of the people who had become her family over the past year. Admiral Martinez, who had given her a purpose beyond mere survival. Dr. Hawking, who had helped her understand the gift that had defined her life. Captain Rivera, who had fought beside her in the darkness and never questioned her decisions. What if we combined both approaches? She said finally. Use the enhancement procedure on me while simultaneously training a small group of volunteers in basic quantum manipulation. If I don't survive, they might be able to continue the mission. The room fell silent as everyone considered the implications. Sarah was proposing to sacrifice herself for a chance to save Earth, while simultaneously asking others to risk their lives for the same goal. Sarah, Admiral Martinez said gently, you don't have to do this. We'll find another way. No, she replied firmly. We won't. You know as well as I do that conventional tactics won't work against the Third Fleet. This is our only chance. She turned back to the viewport, watching the stars that might soon be the only witnesses to humanity's final battle. Somewhere in the darkness, an enemy fleet was preparing to bring an end to everything her species had accomplished. But darkness was where Sarah lived, where she had always been strongest. How long do I have to decide? She asked. The volunteers are already being selected, Martinez admitted. If we're going to do this, we need to start within the week. The Catherians won't wait for us to be ready. Sarah nodded slowly. She had spent her entire life hiding in shadows, using darkness to survive and protect others. Now she would become darkness itself, one final time to save the world that had given her purpose. The girl who had learned to disappear was about to make the ultimate sacrifice to ensure her species would never disappear from the galaxy. The medical facility on Titan Station had been converted into something that looked more like a quantum physics laboratory than a hospital. Dr. Hawking and her team worked around the clock, preparing the enhancement procedures that would either transform Sarah into humanity's ultimate weapon or kill her in the process. Sarah lay on the examination table, Surrounded by machines that hummed with barely contained energy, quantum field generators created a stable probability matrix around her body, while neural interfaces mapped the unique patterns in her brain that allowed her to manipulate darkness itself. The process was intrusive and uncomfortable, but she endured it with the same patience that had kept her alive in the shadows of her childhood. "The volunteers are ready," Admiral Martinez reported, entering the lab with Captain Rivera and a young woman Sarah didn't recognize. "This is Lieutenant Amy Wong, our most promising candidate for quantum enhancement." Sarah studied the lieutenant's face, seeing determination mixed with fear. Wong was barely 25, with the lean build and alert eyes of a reconnaissance specialist. She reminded Sarah of herself at that age before the weight of war had settled on her shoulders. "You don't have to do this," Sarah told her. "The mortality rate for the procedure is over 60%. "With respect, ma'am," Wong replied, "someone needs to carry on your work if the enhancement doesn't go as planned. I've studied your mission reports. What you've accomplished is incredible, but one person can't win a war alone." Sarah almost smiled at the familiar words. She had said something similar to Admiral Martinez when she first volunteered for shadow operations. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was now on the other side of that conversation. Dr. Hawking approached with a tablet displaying Sarah's latest medical scans. "We've run every simulation we can think of. The enhancement procedure should amplify your quantum coherence by a factor of 50. Giving you the ability to manipulate probability fields across entire star systems. But the energy required will put enormous strain on your cellular structure." "How long would I have?" Sarah asked. "Hours, maybe days if we're lucky. Your body would essentially be burning itself out from the inside, converting matter into pure quantum energy. It would be unpleasant." Sarah nodded calmly. She had accepted her fate weeks ago. "And the mission parameters?" "The Catherian fleet will emerge from hyperspace here," Martinez said, pointing to a holographic display of the Sol system. "Intelligence suggests they'll establish a staging area near Jupiter before beginning their assault on Earth. That gives us a narrow window to strike while their forces are concentrated. If Sarah can disrupt their quantum field generators during that window," Hawking added, "their ships will lose cohesion and tear themselves apart. The entire fleet would be destroyed instantly." It was an elegant solution. The Catherians relied heavily on quantum technology to maintain their ships' structural integrity during faster-than-light travel. Without those field generators, their massive vessels would collapse under their own mass, but it required Sarah to get close enough to the enemy fleet to affect their quantum systems while simultaneously maintaining the energy output needed to manipulate probability on such a massive scale. It was, by any reasonable measure, impossible, which made it perfectly suited for Sarah Chen. "When do we begin?" she asked. The enhancement procedure took 12 hours and required Sarah to remain conscious throughout. She needed to guide the quantum modifications to her brain structure, using her existing abilities to stabilize the new neural pathways as they formed. It was like performing surgery on herself while the patient was awake. The pain was indescribable. Sarah felt her consciousness expanding across multiple probability states simultaneously, experiencing dozens of potential outcomes for every moment. In some timelines, the procedure killed her instantly. In others, she emerged with godlike powers but lost her humanity in the process. She fought to maintain focus on the timeline where she survived with her mind intact. Lieutenant Wong underwent a similar but less intensive procedure in an adjacent room. The goal wasn't to give her Sarah's full abilities, but to awaken the quantum potential that existed in all humans to some degree. If successful, Wong would be able to perform basic shadow manipulation and serve as a backup if Sarah's mission failed. As the procedures neared completion, alarms began sounding throughout the station. Captain Rivera's voice echoed through the comm system. "All hands to battle stations. Long-range sensors have detected a massive hyperspace signature approaching the outer system. The Catherian fleet has arrived ahead of schedule." Sarah opened her eyes, feeling power coursing through her body like liquid lightning. Her enhanced senses could perceive quantum fields throughout the station, probability streams flowing like visible rivers through space-time. She could see the potential futures spreading out before her. Thousands of branching possibilities, all leading to the same critical moment. "How do you feel?" Dr. Hawking asked anxiously. "Different," Sarah replied, sitting up slowly. The movement sent ripples through local probability fields. causing nearby instruments to flicker between possible readings. I can see so much more now. Every choice, every possibility, all existing simultaneously. She turned toward the outer system, her enhanced perception allowing her to sense the massive disturbance in spacetime caused by the Catherian fleet's arrival. Hundreds of ships, each one a monument to alien engineering and destructive power, were beginning to emerge from hyperspace near Jupiter's orbital path. The fleet composition is larger than we expected, Rivera reported. Over 300 vessels, including their new Dreadnought-class ships. Earth's defenses won't last an hour against that kind of firepower. Sarah stood and walked to the viewport, her form seeming to flicker between dimensions as her enhanced abilities interacted with normal space. The quantum energy coursing through her cells was already beginning to break down her molecular structure, but she estimated she had at least 6 hours before the damage became critical, more than enough time to save her species. "Lieutenant Wong, are you ready?" she asked. Wong nodded, though Sarah could see the strain the procedure had placed on her. The young woman's quantum abilities were modest compared to Sarah's enhancement, but they would be sufficient for what came next. "Admiral, I need a stealth ship capable of reaching the Catherian fleet undetected. Something small and fast with minimal life support requirements." "The Whisper is standing by," Martinez replied. "She's our newest stealth prototype, designed specifically for your operations. But Sarah, the radiation from your enhanced abilities will overwhelm her shielding within hours." "That's all the time I need," Sarah said, already moving toward the hangar bay. Behind her, probability fields swirled and twisted as her presence began affecting local spacetime. The final mission was about to begin, and with it, the transformation of a frightened girl who had hidden in shadows into something that would be remembered throughout human history, not as Umbra, the shadow that brought fear to her enemies, but as the guardian who sacrificed everything to ensure her species would see another dawn. The darkness was calling her home one last time. The Whisper slipped through space like a phantom, her stealth systems bending light and radiation around her hull, while Sarah guided the ship through probability streams that only she could perceive. The Catherian fleet loomed ahead, a constellation of death and destruction that dwarfed anything humanity had ever assembled. Lieutenant Wong sat in the co-pilot's seat, her face pale but determined as she watched the quantum readings fluctuate wildly. Sarah's enhanced abilities were affecting every system on the ship, causing instruments to display multiple readings simultaneously as reality fractured around them. "I can see their quantum field generators," Sarah said, her voice carrying harmonics that hadn't been there before the enhancement. "Each ship has 3 primary nodes maintaining structural cohesion. If I can create a cascade failure across the entire fleet..." She trailed off as her enhanced perception revealed something unexpected. The Catherian ships weren't just preparing for an assault on Earth. They were conducting some kind of ritual. Their vessels arranged in a precise geometric pattern that focused quantum energy toward a single point in space. "Wong, can you access their communication frequencies?" Sarah asked urgently. The lieutenant's fingers flew over the controls, her newly awakened quantum abilities helping her interface with the ship's systems in ways that would have been impossible before. "I'm getting fragments of their command chatter. Something about a probability anchor and temporal cascade prevention. I don't understand what they're talking about, but Sarah did." Her enhanced perception allowed her to see the quantum structures the Catherians were building, and the realization filled her with horror. They weren't just planning to destroy Earth. They were preparing to erase humanity from the timeline itself, making it so her species had never existed at all. The geometric pattern of their fleet was designed to create a stable time loop, anchoring the past in a configuration where humans never developed quantum manipulation abilities. Sarah's very existence and that of every other human with shadow-walking capabilities would be retroactively prevented. "They're not just trying to win the war," she whispered. "They're trying to make sure the war never happened." The implications were staggering. If the Catherians succeeded, every victory humanity had achieved, every life saved through quantum operations, would be undone. The timeline would shift, and billions of humans who had lived and died would simply not have been. Sarah felt her enhanced abilities responding to her emotional state, probability fields rippling outward from the Whisper like waves in a quantum ocean. She could feel the Catherian temporal anchor beginning to stabilize, reality itself starting to crystallize around their desired outcome. "How long until their ritual is complete?" she asked. Wong checked her instruments, her enhanced senses picking up quantum resonances that normal humans couldn't detect. 47 minutes. The probability anchor will reach critical stability in 47 minutes. Sarah closed her eyes and extended her consciousness across space, feeling for the quantum threads that connected all possibilities. The enhancement had given her the power to affect reality on a massive scale, but using that power was burning through her cellular structure at an alarming rate. She could feel her DNA unraveling, her very atoms beginning to lose coherence. But she could also see a path to victory. Wong, I need you to take control of the ship's navigation systems. When I give the signal, activate the quantum drives and get us back to Titan Station as fast as possible. What about you? The lieutenant asked, though she already suspected the answer. I'm going to give those bastards exactly what they want, Sarah said with a grim smile. They want to erase quantum-capable humans from the timeline? Fine, I'll help them do it. Sarah's plan was audacious beyond belief. Instead of fighting the Catherian temporal anchor, she would embrace it, using her enhanced abilities to guide the timeline shift in a direction the aliens couldn't anticipate. They wanted to erase quantum-capable humans, but they had made a critical error in their calculations. They had assumed that removing such humans from the timeline would prevent the development of shadow-walking abilities entirely. But Sarah's enhancement had given her insight into the fundamental nature of quantum consciousness itself. She could see that the ability wasn't unique to humans. It was a natural expression of quantum awareness that could emerge in any sufficiently complex biological system, including Catherians. Sarah reached out with her enhanced consciousness, touching the quantum fields surrounding the alien fleet. She could feel the minds of individual Catherian warriors, their thoughts flowing like crystalline streams through probability space. Most were focused on the technical aspects of their temporal anchor, but a few showed the telltale patterns of latent quantum sensitivity. She began working on those few individuals, gently awakening abilities they didn't know they possessed. The process was subtle, disguised as random quantum fluctuations that the aliens' instruments wouldn't detect. But the effect was immediate and devastating. One by one, Catherian soldiers throughout the fleet began experiencing quantum consciousness. They could suddenly perceive probability streams, see multiple timelines simultaneously, and sense the emotional resonance of every living being around them. For a species that prided itself on logical thinking and emotional control, the experience was catastrophic. What's happening to their fleet? Wong asked, watching as Catherian ships began losing formation. They're discovering empathy, Sarah replied, her form beginning to flicker as the enhancement burned through her remaining cellular cohesion. Quantum consciousness doesn't just grant the ability to manipulate shadows. It creates a connection between minds, an awareness of other beings' suffering. The Catherians are feeling the pain they've caused for the first time in their civilization's history. Throughout the alien fleet, chaos erupted as newly awakened Catherian warriors experienced the full weight of their species' cruelty. Soldiers who had casually ordered the enslavement of entire worlds suddenly felt the terror and despair of their victims. Commanders who had planned genocide found themselves overwhelmed by the emotional resonance of billions of deaths. The temporal anchor began destabilizing as the Catherians operating it lost focus, their enhanced consciousness showing them the true horror of what they were attempting to accomplish. Some aliens fled their posts in madness. Others simply collapsed, unable to process the flood of empathic input. But High General Zix Thera proved more resilient than her subordinates. Through sheer force of will, she maintained control of the anchor's primary systems, even as quantum awareness threatened to overwhelm her mind. All ships, focus fire on the probability anchor, she commanded. Destroy it before the cascade becomes irreversible. Sarah felt the alien commander's determination through the quantum link, and realized that Zixithera was planning something desperate. Rather than complete the temporal anchor as originally designed, she was going to overload it, creating a quantum explosion that would destroy both fleets and leave Earth defenseless. Wong, signal the fleet. Full retreat, maximum speed. But even as she gave the order, Sarah knew it was too late. The quantum overload was already beginning, reality itself starting to fracture around the Catherian anchor point. In minutes, maybe seconds, a wave of destructive energy would expand outward at faster than light speed, consuming everything in the Sol system, unless someone stopped it. Sarah stood up from the pilot's seat, her form now flickering rapidly between dimensions as her cellular structure reached the point of total breakdown. The enhancement had given her the power to save her species, but only at the ultimate cost. "Tell them I lived in shadows," she said to Wong, but my call sign commanded light. Before the lieutenant could respond, Sarah stepped sideways into quantum space, her consciousness expanding across probability itself. She became the shadows between stars, the darkness that existed in the spaces between atoms, the quantum uncertainty that allowed reality to exist at all. The Catherian anchor exploded outward, its destructive energy racing toward Earth. But Sarah was there to meet it. Her consciousness spread across space-time like a net of living darkness. She absorbed the quantum explosion into herself, converting its destructive potential into pure possibility. For one impossible moment, Sarah Chen existed as a force of nature itself, her will the only thing standing between humanity and extinction. Then, with a flash of light that could be seen across the galaxy, she collapsed the quantum field, taking the alien fleet and her own existence with it. When the light faded, the Sol system was quiet. Earth remained safe and whole, protected by a sacrifice that few would ever understand. In the distance, debris from the Catherian fleet drifted silently through space, all that remained of an empire's final gambit. Lieutenant Wong guided the Whisper back to Titan Station, carrying news of victory and loss in equal measure. The Shadow War was over, ended by someone who had learned that the greatest darkness was not the absence of light, but the willingness to become that absence so others could shine. In the years that followed, as humanity expanded across the galaxy and encountered new allies among the quantum-awakened Catherians, they would remember Sarah Chen not as Umbra, the shadow that brought